Hey everybody, it's me, Yordle Man, the Waifu Collector, still the only fair human on Earth, and as we all well know, there are a lot of fighting games coming out in the near future, more specifically, tag-based fighters. But today, I only want to focus on one, and it's the one that, at least on paper, is the biggest of the three. I am of course talking about Marvel Tokon Fighting Souls. It's a big game. It's got Marvel and Sony power backing it, and they called up Arc System Works to develop it, fresh off of Dragon Ball FighterZ and Guilty Gear Strive success. And while thinking about Marvel Tokon, I started to wonder what kind of fighting game it would be. What would it offer? And I'm not talking about gameplay. We wondered about that and we got our answers. No, I'm wondering what it'll offer in terms of content, because there is no one size fits all for this in fighting games, unfortunately. And even with whatever undoubtedly sizable budget Tokon has, lots of the possible content additions are still far from a guarantee. Now, obviously, I've been doing some thinking about all of the upcoming fighting games, but for 2XKO, we literally know what kind of content it'll offer. And for Invincible, it seems easier to guess at, although I'd love to be pleasantly surprised. So let's have a wee think about what content in Marvel Tokon might look like. Let's start off simple and talk about the possibility of cosmetics in Tokon, because of course we all love and can't wait to see our favorite Marvel heroes in the game, but we also know that over the many decades that a lot of these characters have existed, they've had more than a few reimaginings or temporary wardrobe changes. And in fighting games, all of that can potentially be pulled on for costumes. You know, you play a game like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat and they love to give their characters alternate costumes. Usually at the very least it's a default and a single alt for each character. Or we could look at the likes of Tekken and Soul Calibur, who would rather give you a bunch of customization options to run wild with. But those are different because they're 3D games. However, despite the endless sea of possibilities for character outfits involving Marvel heroes and implementing costumes being something that is very possible, history is not on our side. Because Arc System Works don't really do costumes in their games, unfortunately. They are color guys. So they don't do costumes, they do palette swaps. Which is significantly less interesting, significantly less compelling, significantly less likely to be purchased. So yeah, you look and that's how Guilty Gear is, or even Dragon Ball FighterZ, where lots of characters in that franchise have had multiple outfits, but still, neither of those games has costumes. But there could be some spark of hope. ArcSys also did Grand Blue Fantasy vs. Rising. And that game does have some costumes. Now, it's not a lot, and they aren't for every character. There's only like 7 or something, but it's not nothing. However, just as a side note, I always kind of felt when stuff like this would happen, be it with Grand Blue or King of Fighters or whatever, when the game doesn't really do costumes, but there's just a select few characters who have an alt, that sort of feels worse to me than there being no costumes. Maybe because like, you're showing me you can do it, but you just won't, you know? So I just see a couple of costumes in Grand Blue and I'm like, oh, you guys can do it. And you guys also do Guilty Gear. Why aren't you putting costumes in Guilty Gear? I promise you they would have been making Scrooge McDuck money if they were giving the Guilty Gear Strive characters costumes. And before someone says, it's not that easy to, I never said anything was easy. I said that they can do it. At the end of the day, they want money. I'm telling them that they could have had it, a lot more of it. But yeah, back on track. So we know they don't really do costumes, but they have before, just a little bit. However, I wouldn't be surprised if Marvel Tokon is the largest budget they've had for any of their fighting games. I don't know that for a fact, but it wouldn't surprise me, given Sony's involvement and the IP they're handling. And with that greater budget, perhaps ArcSys hires additional staff so that nothing on the gameplay and character side suffers, but we can actually get some costumes in an ArcSys game. Maybe, it could be. I'm not saying I'm gonna hold my breath for it, but it is possible. We've seen what costumes and skins can do for games in terms of generating revenue. Now with the Marvel IP and their characters at your disposal, the time has never been better for ArcSys to try and make costumes a fairly prevalent part of their games. But okay, that's cosmetic content. What about the actual game? In a fighting game, what are you supposed to do? Just hop online and fight? That's not enough. That hasn't been enough for a long time. Yes, we want to get online and fight, right? But that can't be my only option. So what will Tokon offer in terms of single player content? Well, Mortal Kombat kinda made it so that everyone thinks about story mode, but will we get something like that in an Arc Sys game? Well, we might. We have before actually, and as we established, things might be different with Tokon. Everything might go a little bigger and a little better, maybe. See, Guilty Gear Strive had this weird thing where it had an in-game, in-engine story mode, but it was not playable. So you literally just watch a story, you don't participate in the fights. Very odd. But before that, with Dragon Ball FighterZ, it was a more fleshed out story mode, with fully animated cutscenes and playable fights, duh. But even Grand Blue had a decently competent story mode or adventure mode or whatever. It didn't have as many animated scenes as FighterZ, but it did have some RPG elements and even unique enemies exclusive to that mode. In both of these cases, Arc Sys was handling someone else's big IP. When they had to foot the bill themselves, like with Guilty Gear Strive, they had to cut back a bit. And here in the case of Tokon, they are once again handling someone else's big IP. So actually, it's pretty likely that we get some sort of fairly extensive single player mode. The exact size and quality of it will depend on the budget that Arc Sys is being afforded. At the most, I think it'll be even better than what they gave us in Dragon Ball, and at the least, I think it'll be on par with what was in Grand Blue. To go alongside that though, we can obviously count on the standard arcade mode, but not even all arcade modes are made equally. Not every single one feels rewarding, hell, not every single one gives you a reward at all. But the Street Fighter style character openings and endings have typically felt decently rewarding or engaging. They also usually give you a nice piece of character art or something. Guilty Gear Strive's character arcades were actually pretty decent, and what they did with Lucy from Cyberpunk was actually really great. I think the quality of Tokon's arcade will be dependent on how extensive the quote-unquote story mode is. I think if the single player story is fairly big and extensive, then the arcade will be bare bones, unrewarding, and uneventful. But if the story content is pretty meager, I think the arcade will attempt to be a bit meatier and fill in the gaps. I think we'd all have to pray together to the correct god in order to get like a meaty story mode and a meaty arcade, you know? I just don't see that happening. As for any other kind of single player content mode or even a silly multiplayer mode like Test Your Luck or something, I think that's a definite no-go. They won't waste their time with that. They'll be too busy trying to balance ranked and stuff. However, we can't forget that the possibility of any content we might see in Marvel Tokon at launch is going to be reflective of the amount of characters. We still don't know how many characters this game plans on launching with, and if there are a lot, then the story mode might not be as fleshed out, or the arcade might not be very extensive, as well as the prospect of costumes just going out of the window in favor of the amount of characters. But if there are fewer characters, there might be more hearty additional content surrounding them, because it's easier to do the work of an additional costume, a personalized arcade, and what have you on a smaller cast. And you can just keep it up with post-launch characters because you dictate that pace yourself after all. And initially, you might think that Tokon is a 4v4 game, so you're gonna need a big cast, otherwise all the matches start to feel samey quick. But after we've seen the game played and what it is, it seems to play more like a 1v1 game plus a lot of assists. I can only go based off of what I see because I didn't get into the beta. But yeah, even though you can swap characters, it doesn't look like that's the crux of the game. You even appear to be incentivized against swapping to some degree. And with that in mind, that the game is more so a 1v1 plus assist, that may mean that a large character pool of say like 32 isn't actually required at launch. And we might get a decently smaller number, possibly between 18 and 24. And as I said, if we are getting a smaller or more tame roster, if nothing else, that could bode well for the rest of the content, but only time will tell. Alright though, I think I'm finally done. I just can't wait to see what this game is all about. It's been on my mind. But you tell me, what kind of game do you think we're walking into here? Content wise, do you think it's going to be vanilla Strive tier or DNF dual bare minimum tier? Or do you think it's bigger than Grand Blue but smaller than Dragon Ball or the biggest they've ever done? And will that budget be reflected in the quality? I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a like and consider subscribing for more good gaming talk. And even if you forget everything I said from this video, just remember I am Yordleman, the waifu collector. I am just a normal guy. I like hentai, and I have never convinced anyone of anything ever. Goodbye.